The Electoral Count Reform Act is a part of Senate spending bill. New York Muslims have difficulty finding a place to bury their loved ones. Twitter secretly boosted U.S. propaganda in Middle East. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Pakistan urged Taliban to reverse girls' education ban. Canada opens door to housing for Muslims with Islamic mortgages. From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. Our top story tonight. The U.S. Senate Omnibus Government Funding Package includes the Electoral Count Reform Act. The move is seen as a second blow in days against former President Donald Trump. The Senate negotiated bill marks concrete actions against Trump that is set to be signed into law by the end of the week. The Electoral Reform Act raises the threshold for objections to the Electoral College votes. Instead of one member objecting, it will require 1/5 of members in each chamber to object. The effort comes 2 years after Trump and his allies attempted to use the 135-year-old statute to block the certification of the 2020 presidential election. The bill also clarifies that the role of the vice president in tallying and certifying the Electoral College votes is purely ceremonial. GOP Congressman Drew Ferguson, who questioned the results of the 2020 U.S. presidential election, illegally voted in 3 elections. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reports that Ferguson voted in a county where he no longer lives. That's according to publicly available voter records. It is illegal in Georgia for voters to cast a ballot in a county where they do not live. Ferguson was one of the 7 GOP congressmen from the state who signed a brief supporting a lawsuit claiming irregularities in the 2020 election. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to consider that lawsuit. U.S. Congress, with a unanimous vote, posthumously awarded Emmett Till and his mother, Mamie Till, both civil rights icons, the Congressional Gold Medal. The awards come months after President Joe Biden signed the first anti-lynching legislation named after Till into law. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old African-American boy who was abducted, tortured, and lynched in Mississippi in 1955. His mother, Mamie Till Mobley, had insisted on an open coffin funeral of her son's killings to demonstrate the brutality. A few months after the murder, Rosa Parks attended a rally for Till in Montgomery, Alabama, led by Martin Luther King Jr. Soon after, she refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus to a white passenger, which many considered a watershed moment in the history of the U.S. civil rights movement. During a renewed investigation of Till's murder in 2005, the Department of Justice exhumed the teenager's remains. It was to conduct an autopsy and DNA analysis, which confirmed the identification of his body. New York has over 1 million Muslims, but no Muslim cemetery. The community relies on other cemeteries that provide plots for Muslims. But this has become even more difficult after COVID-19, as the costs of cemetery plots skyrocketed. The Washington Memorial Park Cemetery is one of the biggest graveyards in New York that has plots for Muslims. According to a representative, a grave currently costs $9,500. The cost of one grave pre-COVID was around $4,000. When Muslims die in New York City, they're often taken to New Jersey. It's not easy to open a new cemetery in the state of New York, especially in New York City, as nobody wants a cemetery in their backyard. Aurora, Colorado council member Steve Sundberg reportedly filmed himself mocking Mexicans, Arabs, Muslims, South Asians, and others. He made these videos as advertisements for his sports bar in 2020. "Haram, haram," he exclaims when offered bacon by a restaurant worker, raising a sword. Haram is an Arabic word used to denote forbidden practices, like buying pork products. In the video, Sundberg reportedly imitates a variety of accents while wearing costumes that resemble stereotypical depictions of Mexicans, Arabs, Muslims, Sikhs, and others. Sundberg was elected last year. CARE urged him to meet with leaders from the impacted communities. A major bill that would provide a pathway to permanent residency for Afghan evacuees in the United States has not yet drawn enough support to pass Congress. Democratic Senator John Shaheen said that he's frustrated in a statement Tuesday. Shaheen is a leading supporter of the estimated 80,000 Afghans who fled the country during the U.S. military exit from Afghanistan in August 2021. Many of them were eligible for special immigrant visas for their work for the United States. But they were not able to get legal permission to come to the U.S. through the notoriously complicated system. Instead, they were granted a 2-year temporary humanitarian parole. If passed, this bill would have provided Afghan evacuees a way to obtain permanent residency in the United States before that humanitarian parole expires. The legislation failed to secure the support of 10 Republican senators necessary for Senate passage. Twitter secretly boosted U.S. propaganda in the Middle East. Details come after the break. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. Twitter worked with the Pentagon to amplify propaganda about the United States military activities in the Middle East. That's according to an investigation by The Intercept based on Twitter's internal files. Twitter allowed fake accounts to push pro-US narratives, despite pledging to shut down covert state-run influence campaigns. U.S. military officials asked the company to improve the visibility of 52 Arab language accounts used to amplify certain messages. These promoted criticism of Iran, support for the U.S. and Saudi Arabia-backed war in Yemen. This practice continued until at least May 2022. The revelations are the latest in a series of stories based on the so-called Twitter files. These are internal company documents that Elon Musk shared with several journalists for non-mainstream publications. Interest-free mortgages have sprung up in the Canadian housing market to enable Muslims to buy homes, according to a report released Wednesday. Islamic mortgages are necessary because Muslims are forbidden to take or pay interest. Some companies seeing this as an opportunity are now offering halal or permissible mortgages. But there are carrying costs built into the loans. A popular option that conforms to the Muslim faith and Canadian law is a rent-to-own structure, where the mortgage company is also an owner of the property. Another is to create a legal framework where fees rather than interest payments are charged and comply with the Islamic faith. Statistics Canada reported 1.8 million Muslims live in Canada as of 2021, and slightly more than half rent rather than own. Saudi Arabia and Qatar urged the Taliban-led government in Afghanistan to backtrack a decision to ban girls from university education. On Tuesday, the Taliban-run Ministry of Higher Education issued a decision to immediately ban girls from university education until further notice. In a statement, the Saudi Foreign Ministry called on the Taliban to reverse the ban. The Qatari Foreign Ministry expressed deep concern and disappointment over the ban. The Taliban ban was met with widespread condemnation across the world, especially from the UN, the US, Turkey, and other countries. Pakistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs also urged Afghan authorities to reverse the decision to suspend higher education for women in Afghanistan. In a statement, it said the country strongly believes that every man, woman has the inherent right to education according to Islam. Islamic scholars in Afghanistan have repeatedly urged the Taliban to allow women's education, arguing that banning girls and women from schools is un-Islamic. We'll be discussing this during our in-depth analysis segment today, so please stay tuned. At least 20 Rohingya refugees are feared dead and some 180 others stranded in Andaman Sea in the northeastern Indian Ocean with no food and drinkable water, rights groups say. The stranded boat had left Cox's Bazar's coast in Bangladesh for Malaysia about 3 weeks ago. It was stranded due to engine failure. Nay San Win, a Rohingya activist, told Anadolu Agency that they will die of starvation if they're not rescued immediately. The UN Refugees Agency repeated its appeal to all responsible states to rescue those in distress and adrift on boats. Some 161 refugees have been reported dead or missing in sea in 2022. One boat carrying 154 refugees was rescued by a Vietnamese oil service vessel on December the 8th and handed over to the Burmese Navy. The Rohingyas have chosen to escape by sea out of frustration over conditions in Bangladesh. There they have been deprived of education, free movement, and health care in the country's refugee camps in Cox's Bazar. They face a similar situation in Burma, where hundreds of thousands escaped a military genocide in 2017. 413 people died of COVID-19 in the US on Wednesday. That's an increase of 21% in a 14-day period. China, however, has reported that no one died of COVID in China on Wednesday. But hospitals in Beijing and in other cities are depicting a different scenario. They're filling up as the latest COVID surge hits China. Since 2020, China has imposed strict health restrictions as part of a so-called zero COVID policy. But the government ended most of those measures 2 weeks ago after historic protests in the country. The WHO is encouraging China to import vaccines. China has 9 domestically developed COVID-19 vaccines approved for use. These vaccines, however, have not been updated to target the highly infectious Omicron variant. Meanwhile, a Yale School of Public Health report says that COVID-19 vaccines prevented 3.2 million deaths in the U.S. The report covers the last 2 years. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment on Afghan women education. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. If you could see you through my eyes instead of your ego, I believe you'd be surprised to see that you've been blind. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Yeah, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at our in-depth analysis segment.
Thank you, Hena. Now we move to a discussion of Afghanistan. Many of you may have heard the news that broke just in the past 24 hours that the government there has decided to suspend women's education at the university level. This comes after they previously restricted women from attending school after, I believe, the 6th grade. This has obviously caused great concern in Afghanistan and around the world, especially among Muslims who recognize how important education is for both men and women in our deen. So with that, we want to discuss this issue with someone who can really bring an important perspective to it. Let's welcome our special guest, Hurunnessa Fariad, who is the Multi-Faith Neighborhood Network Director of Outreach. And we're very happy to have her here today. Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Walaikum salam. Thank you so much. Glad to be here. I'm doing well.
First, tell us a bit about your background and your connection to Afghanistan. I think our viewers would be very interested in hearing that.
Thank you so much. So I was born in Kabul, Afghanistan. My siblings and I had to flee when I was 2 years old when the Soviets invaded. And I was 2 years old at that time. And we fled into Pakistan for about a couple of years. We lived in Karachi. My mother, unfortunately, passed away in Karachi, but we managed to come to the United States as refugees in the early 80s, part of the first wave of Afghans to come after the Soviet invasion. I grew up in Queens, New York City, And then I moved to the Northern Virginia area in about around 2004. I'm currently on the board of Women for Afghan Women and on the board of LSSNCA, which is the largest resettlement agency here in the DMV area. And my main objective is to help the newly arrived Afghans here through the work of having accessibility to different benefits here through the resettlement agency, and then for Women for Afghan Women, working to help women here in the United States as well as women in Afghanistan.
Alhamdulillah. Well, thank you so much for your work, and may Allah grant the highest rank of paradise to your mother, who passed away when you all were in Pakistan. Let me ask you this. Have you managed to keep in touch with anyone in Afghanistan, family, friends, during these decades of war and occupation? Have you managed to keep in touch with anyone? And what's their reaction been to not only the end of the occupation, but also what the Taliban has been doing since they came back to power?
Absolutely. I still have cousins, aunts, uncles in Afghanistan, in Mazar Sharif, and in Kabul. And the number one thing that they've been going through is a lack of accessibility to resources and needing help, whether it's financially, especially the women in my family who have contacted me to get help. And at times I have raised money to send to them in the last couple of years. Cousins who want to go back to school and who need tuition money, and family members who are just struggling overall because they are either widowed or don't have a male in their family to go out and work. And on top of that, finding work is so difficult as it is in Afghanistan as a whole, that the struggle really comes down to a lot of these women having to do a lot of work outside the home and inside the home to feed their children.
So tell us, how have things changed? It sounds like we were saying it was a difficult situation even during the U.S. occupation there. What's the situation now? We know there's been a lot of concern about the central bank not having access to funds and that contributing to a humanitarian and economic crisis. And now you've got the government, the Taliban, who are imposing some rules that have caused incredible consternation, especially for women. What's the main concern right now on the ground now?
When a government does these types of things, the most vulnerable in the community is the one that's affected, and it's usually women and children. And that's been an obvious case going in Afghanistan, and we've seen this throughout the years in the media and stories, personal stories that Afghan women have told in the media and in their own stories and platforms across social media. And I think it's important for us to see that the women who are trying to uplift themselves from a country that has been in war for over 40 years, even during the 20 years of so-called democracy that was in Afghanistan, there were still challenges for women, especially poor women or women who are in rural areas who could not have access to education, or there weren't any teachers in their provinces or villages. It was something that they had to really struggle with. And when you make women choose between their livelihood and their education, it puts them in a real big bind. And at times we see in Afghanistan that women have always had challenges. It's more evident in the last 40 years, whether it's not being able to go outside without a chaperone, whether they're now not being able to go to school in the universities. It's a constant struggle for women to have access to things that are part of their rights as Muslim women in the world. Unfortunately, when we have governments that are imposing these types of rules on women, it actually not just only affects those women and their family members, it affects that society as well from moving forward when you're comparing it to the rest of the world.
So let me ask you this. Are you familiar with what the Afghan government is saying about this suspension, what their explanation for this is? And from your perspective, as a Muslim woman, someone who has an amazing education and has contributed so much to our country and to Afghan women, how do you respond to what they're saying? Well, if you had a chance to sit down with the leadership of the Taliban, what would you say to them to try to get them to see how harmful what they're doing is?
Definitely. A lot of times when men are in power, the one thing they could do is suppress women is by cutting off their access to education and work and their movement up in society. And when you do that, it's an easier way of controlling women and using Islam as an excuse to move that idea forward. But we know that Islamically, women have just as much right to get an education as men do. Actually, it's something that's encouraged in our deen. And to say that women are supposed to just stay home and cook and clean and have babies is a direct insult to our faith. We see that throughout history, how women have contributed, Muslim women have contributed in so many different areas of life. Without education, without having the access to be able to get into that field that they're having interest in, how are they going to move forward with the rest of the world? How are they going to be part of the movement that's creating cures for cancer or other areas of science, whether it's technology or even the environment? Everyone needs to be part of the learning process. And we've seen throughout history that when you limit the access of education to women, that society actually doesn't thrive at all, regardless of what the men are doing.
So what do you think is the next step here? How do you think this issue will be resolved? There have been some, I think, protests in Afghanistan. Obviously, there's concern about what the reaction to that could be. Where do you see this going? What's your hope for how this will turn out ultimately?
I do hope that the government in Afghanistan changes its mind on this decision and sees that it's not to the benefit of the country, but actually to the demise of the country and the women that live in Afghanistan, understanding that allowing women to go to school helps them move Afghanistan forward from even the Islamic perspective as well. That when you suppress women and tell them to stay at home, what you're going to have is an uprise in protest, in violence, in spending time and energy in trying to quell that down. But what we could actually do is actually use that time and energy to allow women to go to school, to uplift Afghanistan, to catch up with the rest of the world. I mean, 40 years of war, we're already behind. And now we're put in a position where we're not even moving forward to catch up. We're actually moving backwards.
So, here in the United States, what are things that you think our government should be doing to help the people of Afghanistan, as well as people who recently come here, whether that's the central bank funds release or anything else? What do you think our government should be doing?
I think the American government owes the Afghan people in many respects. Here in the United States, we were supposed to have the Afghan Adjustment Act passed, but unfortunately it was not included in the bill to be passed just in this last couple of days. And that is a very disappointing in our community, because we were hoping that the Afghans who came to the United States last August, a year and a half ago, would have an easier way of applying for green card instead of waiting to be accepted as asylees in this country. But that did not go forward. And for a country who brought all these Afghans here, it would have been the most logical and easiest way to get this issue resolved, instead of having people waste so much money and time and energy trying to find lawyers and attorneys who can fill out these forms, and take such a process that's so long and intricate. And at times, a lot of people might not even be qualified for asylum. And what's going to happen to them? Are they going to be sent back? This would have been the easiest way to get Afghans who are already here a more legal status here in the United States, and getting them the green card that they, I think, deserve for coming into the United States and escaping what they felt was a threat to their life and to their families' lives. In Afghanistan, we have to make sure that we're constantly keeping Afghanistan in the forefront of our elected officials here in the United States. You can't just bring a group of Afghans here and then forget about the rest that are over there, the ones who are suffering. You see videos of little children begging on the street, the mothers on another side of the town begging for money, the brothers on the other side. These kids are supposed to be in school. These kids deserve an education just like everybody else. But for some reason, when it comes to Afghanistan, the world is blind, deaf, and dumb. And we just turn our cheeks and say, well, we bought this many here in the United States and some in other European countries and some other countries around the world, but that's not enough. Afghanistan actually played a pivotal role in making sure that the Soviet communists were not taking over countries in that area with the help of the United States. But the United States, I feel like, does need to do more in making sure that they live with dignity and pride.
Absolutely. It's a very sad situation, disturbing situation, humanitarian crisis, an economic crisis, and then now you add on top of that the plight of women in school. So may Allah guide the people of Afghanistan to thrive and succeed. by properly upholding Islamic values at every level. And may Allah guide us to be of assistance to all oppressed people around the world, no matter who's doing the oppressing. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it and appreciate your work. And we hope to have you back soon to get more updates about the situation, hopefully positive updates. Inshallah.
Inshallah. I pray that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And Hena, we'll send it back to you.
Thank you so much. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.